Welcome back. This is Senate Transportation. It's Thursday, Leap Day, January 29th. We are continuing sort of on our discussions around automatic traffic law enforcement, but this is about license plate readers parking. The city of Burlington is interested in doing this and has some questions about their ability to do so. So
yeah,
introduce yourself and let us know what the problem is.
Okay, my name is Jackie Espardi. I'm Division Director for Parking and Traffic for the City of Burlington. Our objective here is just to start a pilot program for the automatic license plate recognition program for City of Burlington parking enforcement. The difference between what we're doing right now and the license plate recognition would just be the very first part of the process. So I was explaining the license plate camera would be affixed to a vehicle. Our parking service agents will be driving around. If the camera catches a vehicle that is not compliant with parking, then the vehicle would pull over. The parking service agent would then get out of the car and write a ticket. So similar to what they're doing now, the license plate the recognition just allows an easier process, and kind of it also allows us to sell different types of permits for people that are hybrid working, which is how this all kind of started. So we have a couple of parking garages, and people are no longer working in the office 5 days a week. So with this program, we would be able to sell 30 punches on a punch card. And if the license plate vehicle drives by, sees the plate, then you go from 30 to 29. And if you're only working 2 days a week, that would be just an easier way to pay for parking. I've included a little map of how we plan to use it. So the first section is the actual LPR read on the license plate, which would tell us.
Like this.
Yeah, I'm gonna do my stack here. That's which stack I've got it right here.
So the first part, the license plate read would tell us if the vehicle is compliant or not. So compliant means they either have a permit for every day, or they have a punch card, a residential permit, or they paid for parking using our Park Mobile system or a kiosk. Not compliant means that they have not. So if the person is not compliant with the parking rules, then the image that we've taken with the LPR reader would be deleted automatically. The vehicle would pull over, the parking service agent would get out of the car, write a ticket. If they are compliant, we would store that information, so the photo of the license plate. We would plan for about 180 days. We're open to changing that. The reason that I chose that was because, let's say they purchased 60 punches for their punch card. I would like proof of those 60 punches, and then we can delete those. So as soon as their purchase is over, then we can delete all those photos.
And I think there probably will be those kind of concerns going forward. I think the main issue is you want to do this, but you don't think your lawyers are saying you're not allowed to.
Correct.
And then you would need legislative change to the license plate reader part of statute,
yes.
23-1607.
That's
this particular application.
However, UVM uses it, and then the city of St. Albans uses it. So their lawyers either aren't very good lawyers,
or they
might.
And you got yours was a UVM issued, or was it a private?
She's understood in that.
Yeah.
I don't know. So I got this from a private entity on Friday night at the Seth Meyers show. It wasn't Burlington. It was a
private UPP. Yeah.
Do they use the technology?
I don't know. I don't think so. To the best of my knowledge.
I think they just put that picture to make it look like they have your license plate.
So we do take photos. We take about minimum five photos every time a ticket is written. They don't get printed on the ticket like that, but they do get put on our website, and then the customer can then log on, pay the ticket, see the photos as proof.
5 photos for each ticket.
Minimum, yeah. Front license plate, back license plate, then.
So if I may, one way I think UVM might be getting around it is they don't have access to DMV. I think they are just tracking the license plate. The first time a license plate is observed to violate things on their campus network, they issue a warning, and the next time they issue a ticket, and then maybe that's when they request to go to the DMV.
Well,
they don't pay it.
This was my understanding is that at first that's what I said when I heard about this issue. It's like, oh, well, you're going to have to connect connect to the DMV system, but you're not asking to have their address or send it to their house.
No,
You're
we-
just saying, we
we
just
do
wanna
that.
know, we need to read the license plate to make sure if they've paid or not. Like,
Yeah.
So they put money in the meter, basically.
Right, so we do have DMV access already. So after 30 days of someone not paying a ticket, then we look their address up on DMV and then we send them a ticket in the mail. But the ticket is placed right on the windshield, and if someone pays within 30 days, we don't ever look anything up on DMV.
Good.
And the data is
That's the
saved.
point I was making before. I mean, we're very, very careful. We're being overly cautious, I think, on some of this information that's already there.
So, we have a difference of opinion, obviously, in terms of the use of this technology then. If the city of St. Albans thinks it's okay, your attorneys are saying, you think that the statute needs to give you the authority or change the law to for this particular use. I guess we should talk to Donna. I mean, it seems like this is more of a clarification of what the statute intends
Yeah.
and who can do it.
Do you have proposed language you want to bring forward for us to then compare and overlay to get our opinion from our legislative council?
We can certainly help develop something, yeah.
Yeah, if you guys wanted to propose something that we could,
Are you thinking of a pilot or more of a statutory clarification?
I would assume what you guys are looking for is statutory clarification.
This doesn't seem like it's a pilot so much as,
Yeah, I mean, because if it's not connected to the personal information, I don't see the same issues that the license plate reader issues had before.
So I'll say this, I fully support this. We need to better utilize parking spaces. This would allow for better use of high valued land in our dense areas. My only hesitation to move forward with language is I just don't want to tip the boat on this thing because there's a lot of privacy concerns. And so if the Senate and the legislature is comfortable with it, I just don't want to derail the pilot program because I think it's important to get everybody more comfortable with it. So I'd love to see that language so that people can defend it and make sure that it walks those parameters and those guidelines around privacy concerns and so on.
I'm not clear on what you would like to do versus what you're doing now, because you're taking 5 photos now.
Yeah.
Could you just clarify for me what you think needs to be changed? In other words, what you would like to do that you're not able to do or are not doing now?
Yes, what we'd like to do is place the license plate recognition cameras on our vehicles so that when we drive around, it's easier to tell if a vehicle is compliant,
As opposed to somebody walking around?
as opposed to someone walking
Well,
and typing in the plate.
Yeah, because right now they have to type in the plate and then they go connect to the computer with the meter, the central meter. And so this would just automatically, as they drive by, it would read it and it's like a light would go off and say, this car doesn't have a payment on the meter that you can write in a ticket. So it's really just reading it to check the database of the payments or the permits instead of who is this person, which is what the other concerns were.
So what are we gonna say when law enforcement comes back in and they wanna do the same thing? Because we have fought this battle before, meaning that this has been discussed and law enforcement are bad, they shouldn't have plate readers and this and that. I mean, so,
I
I
think it's
think,
connected to the plate readers that with law enforcement, that you have all the person's data. They would only know the number of the plate.
but they have access to the data, so let's be
They would.
real, because they do, they can, if they decide at that point in time that they wanna look that person up, all they've gotta do is look the person up.
Well, that's my question is, I don't think they would be able to look it up.
So the folks that are in the street that are actually writing these tickets don't have access to any of that information.
How long do you want me to take to find?
We can look at it.
I got it right now.
We could put rules to prevent that if you want scenarios.
Right, I mean, if you could do it now, then there's nothing we can do about it.
But locking down access to the DMV system to make sure that we're securing that,
There wouldn't even need to be a connection to the DMV. I mean, like right now, you can get information, like insurance companies get information to the DMV. There are exemptions, there are ways you could go to DMV, get personal data to license plate, and the police do. But what I understand the city is asking for is just to use an HPLR, but not to have any connection to the DMV's database.
No, so we only have 2 folks that are allowed to go into DMV. They don't work on the street, they work in the office. And they only do so after the 30 days when someone doesn't pay their ticket. So it's completely separate.
Do they do that now?
They do that now, yes.
Right. So you're not asking for a change there.
You're asking for the photo to be taken through this technology as opposed to someone walking around and taking the photos.
Yes, and it's really, I mean, they're still gonna walk around and take the photos, they're still gonna check. So it's just the automated process of taking the photo while the vehicle is driving.
You open a can of worms, you're gonna be, if what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and you're opening up a can of worms. That's gonna go in a direction that you folks don't want it to go into.
I don't know.
And this statute is, if we don't do anything, it gets repealed on January 1st, 2024. So I don't know if it's repealed, you could do it. I don't know, because I think this is the thing that your lawyers are saying prohibits you from doing it now. So if this is repealed, I don't know what the underlying law is.
If they can take a photo, a person taking a photo, and they're now operating a vehicle that's taking a photo, isn't there an argument that they're just using a
Let's
bigger
bring
camera?
them in law enforcement then.
Well, the difference here is not that it's a camera.
Points on the license.
The difference here is not that they're in a vehicle. It's just that the computer will read the license plate and tell you what the number is and check another database. It's automatically do it really quickly. So they can just kind of like drive slowly by and just, they don't have to like type each one in.
And law enforcement says, as I didn't share with you guys because it wasn't part of the discussion, but law enforcement says the neat thing about the plate readers was at nighttime, as he was sitting there, that he didn't have to, he could accurately get the plate number and make sure that he wasn't stopping a vehicle that he wasn't supposed to be stopping. So that's law enforcement. So law enforcement saying, okay, so you're gonna get that argument back that you folks haven't wanted to have back. And I mean, you basically have got rid of the plate readers.
You folks.
Well, I'm talking to people that didn't want the plate readers, that didn't want the privacy issues. That's what I'm saying as far as that group. So
And we might, but and I guess that's the question is this kind of license plate reader different than that? And I'm not sure, but I hear what you're saying.
UVM does this. I mean, why can't Burlington do it?
Well, that's the question for the lawyers. Maybe
And
this is
Albans
just
is
giving
doing
you,
it.
maybe Burlington just is giving UVM in trouble.
Yeah, okay.
Or,
Or,
and St. Albans, for that matter.
Right. Mhm.
okay, but here's the UMO. If the UMO wanted to start controlling who's parking in their lot, can't they just start tracking with their employees that are allowed to park there? And just,
They could do it by pen and paper, but they can't use an APLR, so say some lawyers.
so say some lawyers, but UVM lawyers right now, I'm guessing are interpreting that they can't. use
Or
it.
they're just waiting till somebody to challenge them, I guess.
yeah, that's true.
Probably really is a question for the council, because I'm not a lawyer, but it could be that UVM is a private property.
You have to do it for the record.
Jamie Feenan, I'm down the city. It could be private property as opposed to a municipal purpose.
Yeah, I'm trying to look through really quick. I haven't read this whole thing, but it's a lot about his retention of records and those kind of things that were the original concerns. It's about what to do with the data, but you would be, so there, you have your own data retention policies, I understand now.
Yes,
So there would, once you use an LPR, you would fall in this. But I wonder why they thought you just couldn't do it at all, or if you just couldn't do it, but you had to follow the reporting and everything like that.
right. And I think it was my understanding it had something to do with law enforcement, but since we're not connected with law enforcement, our parking service agents are not law enforcement at all. So that could be part of why.
Yeah.
But you're doing the same function. You're not part of law enforcement, I get it, but you're doing the same function. So again, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and it does open up a can of worms that where the state has said that this is not what they wanted. They did not want automatic plate readers. And they've got away from that. Now we're getting back into it. Now it's doing the same function.
So I hear you, and what I would say, what I heard from Connecticut today is they did the pilot with just the work zones and everybody's getting more comfortable with it, so they're looking at gradually looking at other.
That's different.
I agree.
That's different. That's a targeted thing, and it's one of the things that I could get behind where I wasn't originally. That's different. It's a different, there's warning, it's different.
My point is Connecticut did what we were contemplating prior to this conversation. And then at the end of it, now they're thinking about doing the things like because that's that municipal thing they were talking about at the end. So they got more comfortable with it.
Well, the discussion that we had about license plate readers, and Senator Ash was here, was around the privacy, and it was around obviously the use of the data. And that's why it was very narrow. But I think we need to go back and look at, because if we're repealing something, then it would go back to not having any parameters at all, perhaps.
Right, this is all about law enforcement, so maybe that's the lawyer saying, it's like, this is just say law enforcement and maybe without, if the statute is silent, they don't want to use it, I'm not sure. So we can ask Donna,
Yeah, take a
or
look
we,
at it.
maybe it's somebody else from the council, from the judiciary that wants to look at it, or maybe we just tell you to go to judiciary and talk to them.
And you could also make this case in the House, so if we could get the work zone and you all want just to time it well with the legislative session, if this bill does leave, there could be more conversations, and anything the House does, we'll have to consider more, and it gives us all more time to understand.
Well, I think Senator Pritchard's made this needs to pass through judiciary. They're the ones that have raised the concern before about the privacy. And I think they're gonna see the same things that I'm raising, that we're going down the same road that they had put a dead end on. And they are gonna wanna take a peek at this.
But the license plate readers were, the concern was, well, I saw you out at 11 o'clock at night driving in a particular area. That's, where that kind of concern. I don't think we ever got into the use of technology as it relates to civil violations and parking tickets. It was much more because it was it wasn't targeted to a particular vehicle that was not at parking where it shouldn't have been or violating a parking. It was more that universal reading of every vehicle that went by and the amount of data and tracking. So
And mine is the same that I just raised with the captain on there, for the folks that weren't in the room, was that, they're talking about using citizens. We have the hardest time with people being great actors when they're the best of the best. And when you have those people that maybe, and not in this, not saying it in here, but just saying it in general, people that want to be police officers, they want to act like police officers, and so they get in this role right here, and they take that information that they have, and they take the information and use the availability of what they can find on the internet, and then they could be bad actors, and that's what scares me.
I don't see in here that says you can't use it, but it seems like it's very all about law enforcement. And it doesn't say that you can't do it if you're not law enforcement, but it says, here's everything that law enforcement has to do if they're going to use it. So, but maybe, I'm not a lawyer either, so.
Need to talk to Donna.
Yeah, so we can move on, but you can.
I'd love to see your Burlington lawyers' interpretation of this and language that they.
Right, what change they want to
so
do.
that we can harden this conversation.
We could also look at, there's a type of ticket, a police officer issues a certain type of ticket. We are not issuing that same type of ticket. So maybe that's the difference. A police ticket is, I think we're civil and police are a different type of ticket, where it results in points on your license, that sort of thing. So maybe that's the definition or the change.
I love what you're doing with parking permits. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Punch cards so that you can get more
Yeah, we'd love to do that.
better utilization.
So we can provide sort of the brief legal analysis of why some believe and some suggested language.
Yeah, that'd be fine, yeah. Okay. Is that fine? Did you have it? We have to move on to other
That's
things.
great.
We appreciate it. And it is related to the bill because we've referenced this ALPR section. So we'll be in touch on that.
Thank you.
So the ATV tax, is Mr. O'Connor online or? There he is.
Tommy's iPad.
Welcome, Mr. O'Connor.
What are we gonna do? Field trip? Do some ATVs.
Yeah, we should do an ATV field trip.
That would be great. We'd love to have it.
So just for the record, introduce yourself, and this is in relation to the ATV tax, or this, whether it's a sales tax or purchase of use tax, and who collects that, and if it's on private sales or on only new sales. And that's why we have you here today, although that issue might be addressed by finance, but since we have a member of finance since we talked it before, we thought we'd have you in. Senator Ingles had mentioned it, so let us know who you are and what you think about the taxes on ATVs.
For the record, Tommy O'Connor, I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont ATV Sportsmen's Association, commonly referred to as VASA. And I've been in that role since June. Joining you in the room was also Frank Stanley, who supports us in a lot of our efforts in Montpelier. And real briefly, how the ATV tax affects us and ways we want to look at it is VASA operates under two primary revenue streams. The first one is a trail access decal, which is what folks need to are required to ride our roughly 1,000 miles of trail in the state. And the money earned from that goes to our maintenance program to keep those trails running, keep them safe and operable. The second revenue stream does come from the state through registration as well as citations. I'll stop for a quick. I do apologize. I am on vacation. There's some background noise, so if it's too much, let me know. So that state revenue stream is our primary law enforcement budget. As part of our agreement with working with our trail network, we work with our local sheriff's department, the game wardens, and this year we have one municipality that has signed on to offer law enforcement to, again, work on both citations, but also making sure the trails are being used in the appropriate manner. And that piece, the state component, is a reimbursement, again, primarily from registrations. And if we lose any folks, which we have anticipated from conversations we've had with our members of new taxes on top of the 20% DMV across the board, that also came in, even a 9%, Frank and I were running the numbers, equates to essentially the largest chunk of our law enforcement budget, which is really unfortunate because we work really hard to make sure that law enforcement is supported, but also it helps our towns and those that support our trail network. And most of our trails are on private land. So our private owners want to make sure their area is being protected as well, no illegal riding, people making sure they're not tearing up the trails because that maintains it for a longer time. We had spoken with Frank just before I came on, after I had been announced as the new hiree. There was a sundowning that was going to happen with that 85% of registrations heading to that state budget. And we worked really hard to keep that that amount because that really does, again, support law enforcement. And that's our biggest concern, is if we lose any folks that are just general riders or folks that are no longer going to engage in private sale after this tax would go in place, we fear that our law enforcement budget would be drastically impacted, and that is a big concern for us.
You feel like if there's it's not a new tax, but if the tax is collected then through registrations, then less people would register, and if less people register, you don't have that money for the law enforcement and the maintenance of the trails.
Yes, that is correct.
All right, that makes sense. Any questions for Mr. O'Connor? Yes, sir.
I got caught on this topic in the hallway, and so the question I had for some more experienced legislators is if that is a valid concern, and if we are going to start collecting more revenues from private sales, is there a way to ensure through some formula that the funds that they're currently getting could stay whole through some sort of assurance? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I don't know how you would do that. I think he's talking about a collateral impact.
Yeah.
That if, on the other hand, that's what happens with snowmobiles now. That snowmobile is then there's a sales tax on that value at the time of registration. I don't know to what extent that collateral impact has been experienced by VAS, for example, which seems to be, kind of a parallel system. But I guess what we were dealing with is the fact that if you went to a dealer, then the way in which you were treated and the tax liability was different than if you were doing it through this private sale. And to deal with the disparity that the dealers are feeling that disadvantages them as opposed to the private sale being treated the same, which the only way to do it is really at the registration of that used ATV. So that was part of the discussion that precipitated this, is that if you do it through a dealer, then you're treated differently than the private sale. And when we do used cars, obviously you're paying, at the time of registration. So it's looking at sort of parallel or comparable activities, whether it's vehicle or snowmobile, et cetera.
And the reason why I got involved with it, as I've explained to Frank, is that it wasn't the people were complaining not about a tax of anywhere along the way. They were complaining about when they did trade in at a dealer, that they didn't get tax credit, that they were somehow the state screwed them out of it. Well, and the reality is that they bought the machine used, and so they never paid a tax, and therefore when they went and bought the machine at the dealer, that they weren't deserving of a tax credit because they never paid a tax. Now I get more calls on that than I do anything. I mean, I got a call the other day, and I said, well, hey, we're trying to do it. And the people were upset. Hey, listen, I had to pay the full tax on that. I should have got tax credit. And I said, okay, well, before I understood it, I said, well, okay, well, I'll look into it. Well, now that I understand it, well, did you pay it? My question to him, did you pay a tax when you bought it? Did you buy a private sale? Yes, I did. But I should still get a tax credit. No, you shouldn't. You never paid tax on it. Well, I should get a tax credit. Well,
they're used to getting the tax credit
right.
with a snowmobile.
Snowmobile, car, everything else, and we have one section of the market. And I hear Mr. O'Connor, and I hear the lobbyists about the concerns on the trails and stuff. And I will say this: I'm not known as a person that ever has said anything about collecting tax. I think it does get into a fairness issue. It does get into a complaints that people still want to get a tax credit when they didn't pay the tax. But I'll say this about the industry, with a season like what we have right now, as far as for vast, and people are going to ride no matter what they are. You guys are growing. Look at what New Hampshire's done. I mean, the numbers keep on going up and up and up. And Mr. O'Connor's doing exactly what he should be doing. He should be making sure that he protects and makes sure that he grows his numbers and goes on. I just don't see the correlation of, and again, this comes from a guy that just does not ever want anybody to pay any more tax than what they should ever. But I do see your industry growing, and but I also understand where you're coming from, that you want to make sure that it doesn't impact you in any way.
But I guess the policy question here is, what would be the rationale for treating this particular sale differently than the others? And that's really, I think, what you were getting into is the equity issue.
And we don't know why it historically ended up this way.
I would guess because when it first started, and I'm only guessing, is when they first started on these ATVs, they were 3-wheelers, then they were 4-wheelers, and you were paying $2,500 for them, and it just wasn't a big issue. And it just wasn't
they're
right.
Very,
and they didn't have the trail system, so the people they had them on the farms. They were using them as much as recreation, but almost as much as mending the fences and bringing in the cows and doing whatever and riding on your own 100 acres. And so you didn't get into the trail network system where the snow machines, had been more accepted as far as getting the trail system out there. And so they got there quicker as far as to make sure that it was more in compliance.
The only thing I can say is, if you're not in the state, wherever you are is a beautiful place, if in fact that is the backdrop. Sure, it doesn't look like Vermont right now. Oh, Disney.
In Disney World with my family, yes.
Oh,
Wow, we're taking.
I heard the birds singing. I was like, that doesn't sound like birds singing in Vermont.
nor the foliage.
Yeah, I thought it was his greenhouse. Yeah, Frank.
Frank Stanley, worked for VASA for about 20 years, and we're not opposed to the tax at all. But what we worry about is it's not those avid riders. They're going to stay. It's like every time we raise the hunting and fishing license, average people or the avid people stay. What we lose are those people that fish a couple times a year. So you always, anytime we raise the fee, we always expect a loss of participation. So we're expecting, not the avid guys, and girls, but more of person that rides the trails a couple times a year or runs from the farm down to the store a couple times a year.
They just won't register.
They're just not going to register because they're going to have to go in and pay, X amount of money. So, I would expect 10% loss, which would be about $1,500. We met with Mike Smith at DMV and asked him how much he thought it would raise, and he had no idea. he said they're not gonna do, like, when you go in with a car, they're not gonna do Kelly Blue Book you.
Right.
So, but they will audit you if you put $1.
Right.
So he feels, and I'll let him speak for himself if he wants to come in sometime. I thought he was gonna be here, but, that's what we're concerned about. One way we could do this is, we talk about doing the ATVs because the snowmobiles, do it.
Yeah.
Have to get a text. Vast Snowmobile Association gets 100%. Right now we get 90%. So if we went to 100% of registrations, that should cover us.
Well, we can also see what happens.
And snowmobiles may be shrinking with climate change, and ATVs could be the growth.
Oh, I mean, I think that they're gonna have the growth, but again, I mean, I'm sympathetic to everybody's concern as well. I don't wanna drive business out especially because it's a fledgling industry and we should be finding ways to support it as best we can and get more people out there. I mean, that's what people like to do. They like to get out in nature. These people work hard to get these trails up, and compliance is a big issue. So,
And
Do they have to buy a sticker kind of like Vastas to ride the trail?
Yes.
Because you also get revenue that way.
and the other issue is ATV is growing. A lot of towns have opened their roads to ATV. Vass is more about a trail. We don't actually support a lot of these road openings because they tend to be the ones that cause the most problems, and then the towns come to us for enforcement, and we're trying to do the best we can to get funding for the sheriffs and the wardens to help out on this, so we can get rid of some of the bad riders, get them into compliance, get them tickets. So there's a big need for ATV safety and law enforcement, and it's growing, and we're just afraid we're going to go backwards on that, and
Sure.
we're going to see more problems.
All right, well, thanks for bringing this. Did you have something else, Mr. O'Connor?
And I know the other thing, we did speak with the DMV, and we know that, as much as we stand here today, kind of in the opposition, we fully understand everything that's being brought up, and we do appreciate that. And we do know that since November, when the new system changed over at the DMV, we know we're going to get better data. So I'm also a person who's willing to, accept as it is, but also request we go back and look at data too, as we learn more from this. And I really appreciate the folks at DMV who shared that. And then again, thank you to everybody here for being flexible. Let me zoom in just to speak with you on. If you ever need anything, Frank has all the ways to contact me, and I'd be happy to have any type of conversations going forward. So thank you again, all.
thank you. Enjoy your vacation.
Yeah.
I'll be back soon.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, we're letting Senate Finance take this up. Well, we wanted to hear that testimony. So that's that, unless there's any other questions for Frank or anybody. Okay, so we will move on. Is Mr. Nolan on Zoom?
I'm waiting around.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll be in touch. Hello, Mr. Nolan. How are you today, Ken?
Ken, how are you?
Morning.
Morning. Do you know everybody around this table, Ken?
Believe I do. Met you all at one point or another, so happy to be here.
Probably the only one that you don't have is Mr. Chittenden.
Again, I'm Tom Chittenden.
Oh,
You don't have VIPSA members in Chittenden.
No.
No.
Okay, so we're here to talk about some electric charging rates. I know VIPSA had an announcement recently, and so Senator Ingalls had brought that up. So we've talked about this on and off over the years, so that's why we wanted to have you in about your new announcement that VIPSA is doing, and Senator Ingalls can also.
And also, we actually appropriated money to help the smaller utilities for the upgrade to support, the sort of the new
It was 5 minutes.
frontier, so to speak. With it'd be helpful to hear exactly how that appropriation has helped get you to where you are now.
And to add a little bit more context, Ken, is that we're looking, as you're aware, we're looking at ways to have the people that drive electric vehicles commit to the gas tax in certain ways, and we've looked at different avenues, mileage based or collecting at the pump, so to say, or the electric box. And we hear over and over and over that the technology isn't possible, but we see the technology is changing, and I see it as a way to collect from the out-of-state users as much as anybody. But and another thing that we hear is that any changes that are made to go in that direction, it's the small utilities that you guys are representing that would not be able to keep up. In fact, we were told the other day that most of you guys are on Windows 95 software. So here that you are above and beyond some of the big players is rewarding to myself. So the floor is yours, sir.
Great. Well, good morning. Ken Nolan, the General Manager of Vermont Public Power Supply Authority, just for the record. And I put some slides together to talk about what we're proposing to do for the electric vehicle rates, but I'm happy to talk about the advanced metering status and the potential for tax collection here as well, and how that might work. So let me, if I can share my screen here.
Yes, the background's helpful. Requirement to implement rates.
Which is what we did.
Yeah.
Is my screen visible to you folks?
It is.
Great. So just as a reminder, Vermont Public Power Supply Authority, or VEPSA, was created by state statute back in the late 70s. And our purpose is to help the small municipal and cooperative utilities really reach economies of scale. So we're trying to centralize and provide the back office management as much as we can to let them focus on really taking care of the customers. We've got 11 members now. We do work with Washington Electric Co-op, and Burlington just joined as a strategic member in November, I believe it was. So we are working with other utilities, but these 11 really pay our bills, and they're the focus of most of our attention. Spread throughout the state, the smaller utilities in the state that we're dealing with. Just a quick list of the services we provide, and it seems to expand every year as things get more complicated. But we're doing everything from power supply to helping with finances, obviously legislative, regulatory, coverage, IT and cybersecurity, technology support, communications, the whole range of what a normal large utility would have in their corporate or back office operation is really what we try to cover. As most small local governments in Vermont we're really focused on the community and how we can improve things for the community. So that's really leads us to focus first and foremost on affordability. Obviously, reliability for an electric utility is extremely important, so that's high on our list. And also, we tend to look at things from how do we let the customers make their own choices. And that'll become important in a conversation on this particular project going forward. And then we're always focused on how do we do this in a sustainable manner, the most renewable manner possible, while keeping the other components in mind. So on this particular project, I'm sorry, was there a question?
Oh, good. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. This particular project stemmed out of Act 55, which you folks worked on back in 2021. That required all the utilities to implement specialized electric vehicle rates. And the deadline put in place was June 30th of this year, unless the Public Utility Commission granted a waiver for some reason that the utility needed more time. Starting shortly after that act passed, we started doing research as to what was possible. We talked to the legislature about advanced metering and the funding that was going to be required for that. We also began talking with a number of parties, vendors in the market, trying to figure out how we could get access to information on the electric vehicles, and be able to really turn that into a rate. And it was pretty eye-opening, the conversations that we had. As Senator Ingalls mentioned, the small municipals traditionally have pretty severe technology hurdles. So we've been working diligently for the past 5 years trying to do a technology refresh. And that's underway at this point, although it's by no means complete. Just wanted to give you a list. These are some of the parties that we've been talking to, trying to coordinate with. There's a lot of players in this space, a lot of new software companies, manufacturers that are dealing everything from the car manufacturers. GM and Ford actually have now energy departments that are looking at how to manage the vehicle loads and how they can get value out of that. Down to folks like Virtual Peaker, Bellawatt, IP Keys, who are more on the software side, trying to help utilities figure out how to manage loads through software. And then some of these Energy Hub or AutoGrid, are more in the middle. They're acting as a middle component. Also, we worked with Efficiency Vermont, and in particular, New Hampshire Electric Co-op provided some good insights to us on what they did over in New Hampshire around what they're calling a transactive energy program, which is more geared towards solar on their part, but it has pretty good parallels to what we're trying to do here. So from all these conversations, we had a number of findings that really, to our viewpoint, made implementing an EV rate kind of difficult. So the first thing we found is that the charging manufacturers, whether that's ChargePoint or Flow or similar companies, or the vehicle manufacturers for that matter, really viewed the customer usage data that they were gathering on their device. That was a value stream to them. So if you want to get access to that information as a utility, you have to pay those companies to get access. And you need the customer to agree to share it, and then you have to be willing to pay for it. So that was the first hurdle. We also found that the software vendors that the utilities normally use, the folks like Virtual Peaker, who we would contract with to give us the ability to control devices, they actually charge a per device fee. So every vehicle or heat pump water heater that is connected to their software, you pay an additional charge for, which makes it really hard to reach economies of scale, because you're always paying an additional fee every time you add something new. And then we found, even within the state, there's a lot of disagreement and folks trying to wrestle to some degree to figure out who's going to control the customer devices. Every piece of the supply chain is really looking at that revenue that the customer could be receiving as a revenue stream for themselves in the supply chain. So we wrestled for a long time trying to figure out, how do we find the path that brings the most value to customers while making sure we maintain reliability and we give the customer the choice for what they want to do. We don't want to be in a command control situation with our customer base. We want to make sure we're giving them the proper information, the proper price signals, and letting them decide what's best for themselves. So that led us to this concept we put forward. Essentially what we're saying is we would create what's called a rider. So it's a program that sits on top of a traditional utility tariff that a residential customer or commercial customer would pay, have very specific criteria that if you meet the criteria, you're eligible for this special pricing. Initially, we're suggesting we'll start that with electric vehicles, but we can see this going into other areas. We want it, as I said, mostly around consumer choice. Want the customers to have the right information, and they'll decide how to react. And we want them to be able to decide how to participate. Some of the more savvy customers may want to participate directly and control their own device. Others may want to work through an aggregator or through the manufacturer of their particular product. We're trying to set this up so that whichever way the customer goes, we're able to work with that approach. And as I said, we want this to be extensible to other appliances. So really, this is driven by the need to put an electric vehicle rate in place, but we can see this over time being expanded into other home appliances, such as the heat pumps, the in-home batteries that many customers are buying, and even solar. As I said, New Hampshire Electric Co-op did a very similar program around their solar generation. So we could see that being folded in here, depending on where the net metering program ends up going.
Okay, and Senator Ingles has a question.
Yes.
Ken, is there an electronic footprint when something's plugged in? Is there a different footprint for different devices? Are we to the technology yet that we can understand when the water heat pump kicks on, or the electric vehicle's plugged in, or the freezer kicks on, or anything like that?
It's a more complicated answer than you would think. Yes, each device has a particular footprint. There are companies that have tried over the years to say, well, I'm going to look at your home meter, your whole house meter, and depending on what the voltage and amperage is doing, I can tell what appliance is running. I personally have not seen any company be able to do that with 100% accuracy yet. There's still a lot of R&D around that effort, but I would say we're not to the point yet where you can pick that type of information up and turn it into a billing, a way to bill a customer. There are efforts. I know Vermont Electric Co-op in particular has looked at smart panels, where you can get the specific data from a circuit in your home, and if you have a furnace or a water heater or heating system on a particular circuit, then there's an ability to track that separately. So there are different ways to get at that information.
And Ken, you have a lot of information on the details of the rate. Let's get into more like information that I'm sure you've prepared for the department or the PUC that is a little bit outside this committee's jurisdiction. So I think for us, we're more interested in how what you're proposing might work with a charge, if that was to be something that we were able to figure out. Does this, help or hurt that kind of effort? Is kind of the key thing for this committee.
Sure. So let me skip ahead here. I got the specifics. Certainly happy to answer any questions on that, and some examples as to how the rate would work. The uniqueness of why we're doing it this way. And I think the key thing for us is we're not controlling consumer devices. So I guess turning to the other questions you had on the tax issue, we do see the way this is structured, it would give us information on the particular usage of the customer charging their car. So in theory, we would have the information available to be able to apply some sort of tax to that and collect it. I would say there are two challenges here. One, this is only going to be Vermont consumers who have a home or a business in the state. So I don't think it gets at your issue around wanting to charge out-of-state people coming through.
Yeah.
I
And
guess
secondly,
that was more of a question as far as to other devices, but not specific to you. But we get that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the second thing, that's just the way we've proposed the program, it would be an opt-in arrangement. So customers would have a right to participate in this, but they would not be obligated to. So I know that's an issue that the Public Utility Commission is discussing right now as to whether we should be changing it to an opt-out. But the way we're envisioning this, it would be a customer choice to participate or not. So we couldn't guarantee we're collecting information from every customer who has an electric vehicle in the territories.
But you're assuming those that want to save money are going to participate unless they're worried about, they don't want to save the money because of privacy or something like that.
Correct. I mean, that's,
Or they somehow would not be subject to the tax if you can't isolate the charge.
Well, the tax is separate, but just their program where if you participate, you can move your charging to a later time, so you're gonna pay less money to your electric utility. But then, if they also had the question about whether they voluntarily paying the tax, then that would be
Another part of that calculus.
Yeah.
right. Yeah, so I think, I guess my personal view is we are still aligned with the mileage collection of the tax being a more appropriate way to do this, at least in the short term. This technology that we're talking about deploying does move us in the direction of being able to collect that tax as a per kilowatt hour charge if you desire to go there. But there are a number of other issues that would crop up when you try to do that. As far as being able to collect information from all the customers, apply the tax appropriately. And as I said, it's not really going to deal with people coming through or into the state. It's just really going to be focused around folks who live here.
or people that decide not to charge through their charger. Because when you talk about a device for our committee's purposes, it would just be the electric car charger.
It could go, we've actually had some conversations around what's called telematics. So this structure we're putting in place could either use the charger itself, or a lot of the new vehicles being put out have an ability for the car to report what's being charged as well. So we're opening that possibility.
Right, but right now you would have to have the manufacturer's willingness to open up their software to give you that data or give that data to the vendor.
All it takes is a law. That's all it takes.
So the reason we structured it this way is because it really becomes the customer. The manufacturer cannot keep that data from a customer. You know, someone who bought their appliance. So if the customer is giving it the information to us, then whatever that fee is from the manufacturer or the charging company, that's really something the customer is going to weigh in their decision whether to participate or not. So we get out of the utility having to have an additional cost to implement this program. It's really the customers are going to look at how much they can save on their electric bill, and is the amount they're paying these other vendors worth it to make that decision.
What is the technology, Ken, that you guys are using that is going to allow you guys to identify when the car is charging and then the ability to assess them a cheaper fare?
Let me back up to the specifics here. So Bella, one of the reasons we partnered with Bellawatt is they actually wrote a software program for New Hampshire Electric Co-op that does those calculations and allows the devices to connect. So they're using a communications protocol called OpenADR, which is a lot of the manufacturers now are adopting this. It's becoming somewhat of a standard. You think of it kind of like a Bluetooth connection. So you're going to register your device with the software Bellawatt's created. And once that connection is made, then they're going to be able to collect data directly off from whatever the device is, whether it's a charger or a car or a battery. That information will be transferred every hour to them, and we'll be able to track it from there in the software and do calculations on it.
It would be up to the customer whether and their individual equipment, whether they use it through their car or their charger, just depending on the situation, what charger they have, which car they have.
Correct.
Senator Chinman.
So I know you want to probably move on, but I'm curious if you've looked at surge pricing as an alternative approach to this. I mean, I'm seeing you wanting to charge less during peak demand, because that's the most expensive electricity to generate when there's an overall huge demand on the network. So you want to offer that discount, but is there a model? Are there models out there where electricity providers basically say, if you charge during these times, we're going to charge you more, which would effectively motivate people to want to get more of their devices intelligent enough to detect those surge moments?
Yeah, the slide I have up right now is the structure we're proposing, and it's moving toward that surge pricing, but we're trying to find the balance between being almost too complicated. So we're saying we're going to pass through the blue part of this chart is we're passing through the wholesale pricing from ISO New England. So that's an hourly price. It's based on when energy is the most expensive. But we will know that price today and give it to the customer so that they have a full day to decide how they want to react. And then on top of that, we're taking the capacity and transmission costs, which are they're known in advance, and those prices occur in pretty, at least right now, they're in predictable hours. So we're adding that to try to mimic that kind of surge pricing, but give the customer the information far enough ahead of time that they can react to it. There are folks who are moving to real-time pricing, which is more what you're talking about.
End of the month.
So if I just go back and we're looking obviously at two things here, one of which is the benefit of the customer and how they manage their electrical demands. But the other is, and I think I just want to make sure I go back to what you stated, that from your perspective, the vehicle miles traveled in terms of the way in which we generate the revenues for the transportation infrastructure is the preferred model than where we are now in terms of technology, or it really challenges one of your basic premises, and that's customer control and opt in, opt out. So did I understand that correctly, that the recommendation, and part of what we're talking about here is how you manage and make sure that people are charging when off peak and incentives to do so, as opposed to how do we replace the lost revenues from the gas tax. And my understanding, if I just want to reaffirm, is that your conclusion is vehicle miles traveled is the better alternative for that particular part of this whole discussion, which seems to be broader than the replacement revenue to really the larger utility and how they manage demand. And did I understand you correctly about vehicle miles traveled as your recommended alternative for the replacement of gas tax?
You did. I think, as I understand the challenges you've been wrestling with, there's kind of two components. There's, do the utilities have the technology to collect information that would be needed to develop a tax?
Right.
And is that the right way to go about it? And I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think from what we're seeing with Velowatt and companies like that, we're starting to see the technology come into place that could do those calculations, but it still comes with a number of variables and challenges in collecting that tax from everybody who has an electric vehicle. We're still not there, and given that situation and the challenges that would come up in trying to make sure that the tax is equitable across all the consumers, it still seems to me that the vehicle miles traveled is the proper way to go and make sure you're going to be able to be equitable in charging the tax. The technology's here, but it's still not going to collect the revenues in a proper way that should be collected to make sure everybody's paying.
Okay. Well, we have to move on to our next item, is there any other questions for Ken?
Well, thank you, Ken, and I'm glad that you guys have got rid of Windows 95. Thank you for the technology that you guys are doing and being leaders in the industry. Appreciate that.
Great operating system.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ken.
Windows 95.
Okay, now so we're doing a lot of different things today. Now we're going to trains.
They're all in the waiting room.
The waiting room will be opened up.
Trains.
Trains.
Ethan.
You have this presentation.
I do.
There's a little field trip on it.
I think about all the print.
Last time we got in trouble.
Yeah.
You got us out of that
Oh,
trouble.
you did. You got the diplomacy.
So we're moving on to, we'll get some information. I think these are some constituents of Mr. Chittenden, but some work that the Vermonters for People-Oriented Places had done on ridership modeling and potential of Ethan Allen. I don't know if you guys talk about the Vermonter too, but maybe it pertains, but why don't you introduce yourselves and let us know what you want to tell us. Unless, Senator Chittenden, you have an intro.
Just received a really great email from you all with some great research and work that you're doing, and I definitely want to see how we can support more rail in the state. So I look forward to seeing this presentation.
Looks like Montreal is one of the preferred destinations, and
That'd be great.
Yeah, any day now.
if we could get the federal government to move, yes.
Or the provincial government.
Or the provincial, right.
Okay, so Mr. Arnold, you're going to start off.
Yeah, let me try to share my screen and I'll get right into it.
We can see your screen.
You might have just shared your application window and not your entire screen. If you stop sharing and then reshare, and make sure you share your whole screen.
Let's see. All right, does that look good?
Hold on.
Yeah, now you're back to that. We can see your screen, it's your slideshow. But it's not in presenting, but.
Yeah. All right.
No, another nonprofit.
I don't know.
Yeah, you can also tell us who Vermonters for People-Oriented Places, about the organization.
Yeah, so yeah, just to start off, I'm Michael Arnold. I'm a member of VPOP here along with Jake and Colin. We're an all-volunteer organization sort of focused on advocating for affordable and sustainable housing and transportation. And yeah, we really appreciate the invitation to present here today, and excited about your past support for passenger rail, the fact that VTrans has won this Quarter ID grant, and yeah, looking forward to sharing.
There we go.
And are you connected to UVM or another institution, or just a group of volunteers that work on these issues?
Yeah, so I'll say that I'm a grad student at UVM, but I would not say that this is connected to UVM in that capacity.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, now we can see your presentation.
All right, excellent. Yeah, so brief overview. We're gonna talk about a little bit about like we see as a proposed viable route between Montreal, New York City, that route via Burlington and Rutland. We're going to go over a little bit of comparable rail corridors around the US that are receiving investment from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. We're going to go over some of the ridership models that I had sent to Senator Chittenden, looking at the Montreal to New York connection, both for the Ethan Allen and for the Vermonter. And then just briefly share some survey results that we had solicited around the state.
Great.
All right. Yeah, so just to set the background, there's been a lot of investment in higher speed, up to 125 mile per hour top speed passenger rail projects around the country and also in Canada. And we really wanted to highlight that this intercity route between Montreal and New York City via Rutland really outperforms the vast majority of projects that are being funded on the continent. We want to highlight that speed improvements have a lot of potential to both increase ridership and reduce labor costs to provide these services. And the opportunity that serving this New York to Montreal market has to provide revenue that supports service and also sort of reduces per passenger subsidy costs for the state.
So what made that route outperform, or is that what you're gonna tell us?
Yeah, I'll get into the ridership model a bit later. Yeah, and then we think that this is part of there's a lot of partners who sort of need to be convinced to make this happen. Notably, the Canadians have been a little bit hesitant to actually invest in infrastructure on their side, and we think that that there's value in getting ready for some of the other components that would make this route useful, like the connection between Burlington and Essex Junction to through run the Ethan Allen. And
Issue,
What?
the tunnel issue.
Is it a tunnel or an overpass?
Yeah, I thought it was a tunnel issue, but maybe not.
yeah, there's a tunnel and also just like a track ownership issue. But yeah. And then
Senator Shinnet has a question.
I really like this graphic, and I like how it really highlights the Winooski connector, that missing piece to get those two lines. But what I'm not seeing here, is there a direct line, a single train from Montreal straight down to New York City through New York that's not in this visual?
The Adirondack.
Yeah, the
yes. Yeah, the Adirondack does run on the other side.
Albany up to Montreal.
But that runs the same rail line, right? Are they using the same track?
No, they have
So even down, even lower, south of Albany?
No, from Albany, it goes through the Adirondacks up to
Okay.
Montreal.
All on the New York
All on the
side.
New York
Okay, but it's the same, down from
I
Albany
think
down,
from
it's the
Albany
same
south,
rail.
it's the same.
Yeah, okay.
But that little piece right there is what I like, that Winooski connector could do a lot to allow both lines to get to Montreal when we open up Montreal.
Yeah, first we gotta get the other one to Montreal. Okay,
Sorry, we will distract you, we apologize.
No, that's absolutely fine.
This committee has spent a lot of time on that because getting to Montreal has been a priority since I've been on this committee. And the whole diplomatic situation that has to be negotiated to get pre-clearance, because this gets back to your thing about convenience and time, et cetera, because that's having to stop at the border adds considerable time to the trip. So that's why we want pre-clearance, and
do
that's
you know
the,
when
well, we've been told.
No, when it ended. No, it was before 9/11.
I thought this was locked down after 9/11, and that's what made it.
I don't know when the pre-clearance came in.
You know, Michael, when we stopped running the Vermonter to Montreal, because it used to run, I know, in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just know the decade level that it stopped in the 90s.
It was 1995.
Yeah, I think it stopped in the 90s, so it was before. But then when people talked about doing it again, then the border security after 9/11, that changed that conversation.
I know along the border after 9/11, it just got.
Right.
I mean,
But you can do pre-clearance. We do it a lot with airports, and so the model is there. It's just getting the arrangements and the memorandum of understanding and the capital improvements in the Montreal station. Right. So it's something that I guess we would say is, yeah, we're very committed to, and we get told, well, in 3 years, and it's been a lot more than 3 years.
Yeah, totally understood. So yeah, I guess the only thing that I'd say on that is I think that hopefully some parts of this vision will be a little bit more enticing to the Quebecois legislators than previous plans, which may have included like one train per day that takes 12 or maybe down to 8 hours to get to New York.
Mm-hmm.
And just so Michael, the presentation that we have online is different than the presentation you're going through a little bit. So maybe
Yeah, we updated it, and we're happy to resend.
send it when you're done, just so we have the right one up on our website.
Yeah, we'll do.
Okay.
All right, yeah, and then you know, the last point here on the vision is just that you know, we think that the corridor ID studies that do get commissioned from this grant should really you know, take this opportunity to explore the cost benefit of some of these higher capital investment scenarios. And then handing over to Jake.
Oh, so yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about this service and why it is important, and why it might be able to get some of the gears turning on the Canadian side a little bit faster than perhaps what we have seen historically since the Montrealers cancellation. All right, next slide. So this route basically that we're talking about is essentially a continuation of the Ethan Allen Express, which currently terminates in Burlington, across about a 7 to 8 mile rail line known as the Winooski Branch, technically owned by NECR, although not very well utilized, which directly connects Union Station, Burlington to Essex Junction Station, and then heads north via St. Albans to Montreal on the Vermonter line, and then on the connection that would be made to Montreal. And so this connects two of Vermont's largest population centers to Montreal directly. So the advantages of this over the Vermonter is that Montrealers could get on a train and get off directly in downtown Burlington, rather than having to take a bus or an Uber if they were to get off in Essex Junction with the current Vermonter plan. And in addition, because of the much shorter routing of this line compared with the Vermonter, it is much easier to have higher speeds and a shorter trip between Montreal and New York, which can support up to 5 to 9 round trips per day, depending on the speed that is achieved, the average speed in the route. And so this corridor contains elements from both Vermont Corridor ID grants. The two main grants that we've submitted as a state are one that involves expanding service on the Ethan Allen and perhaps adding an additional routing through Manchester North Bennington, and the other one primarily focuses on the Vermonter. But this takes elements of both to really create one service that might be the most appealing to Quebec and New York, and allows for the greatest number of passengers. So next slide. Next, we're going to look at some comparable rail corridors in the US and Canada, which are receiving a lot of funding through both state and federal levels of both countries. So high frequency rail in Canada has a minimum, it connects Toronto to Quebec City via Montreal and Ottawa. Has a minimum design speed of 125 miles an hour, which is the highest that you can get with conventional rail before you start looking at high speed rail. It has approximately hourly service to start and a projected ridership of 17 million per year by 2059. All right, next slide.
And so they're building this now, or that's existing?
This is in progress. The RFP was issued in 2023. Some political complications are emerging potentially with the new government, but it is the current plan of the Canadian government.
Okay, and is it new rail, or they're just upgrading existing tracks, I'm assuming?
It is planned to be a new passenger corridor.
It's new.
It's existing.
The yellow is
Take it all,
existing,
yeah.
is red
Well,
proposed.
it's an existing service, but are they really laying new tracks?
Oh, yeah, like they do in Europe for the TGV, for example. Is that what they're doing with the red?
Yeah, the plan is to have
high
dedicated
speed.
passenger track.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I believe the plan is to have a new dedicated high-speed track, but they haven't yet selected a bidder to do like 100% design. I believe like Alstom and maybe Siemens are competing at this point, but there'll be more of a decision in later this year.
Where is the state of passenger rail in the Northeast? Is it growing? Passenger service? Is the proposal? I see the proposal there, but Is passenger riding gaining momentum on rail?
In the US or in Canada, or both?
Yeah, or in the Northeast?
So passenger rail is definitely becoming more popular. We basically have recovered, Amtrak has basically recovered its ridership entirely as of fiscal year 2023 compared with post-pandemic, and is expected to be at or above pre-pandemic levels next year for fiscal year 2024. And we're also going to talk about another route in the Northeast in the next slide, which is East-West Rail in Massachusetts. So this rail connection is very important for Massachusetts and also important for us as well, because this connects Springfield Union Station directly to Boston in about 2 hours. And they are planning on having 8 trains per day per direction between Springfield and Boston when complete. And so theoretically in the future, you'll be able to transfer from the Vermonter route at Springfield to go directly to Boston for a much more seamless connection. Whereas right now it's not very possible to get to Boston via rail outside of extremely long and unwieldy connections.
Dartmouth coach.
Take a bus, yeah.
Dartmouth coach does exist, but it only gets you as far as Hanover and Lebanon, New Hampshire, and then you have to do some other kind of connection to get all the way to your destination. So the next one is in Michigan. It's a Chicago to Detroit service that is being funded to allow 110 mile per hour top speeds by adding signaling and straightening curves. And again, with a long-term plan of hourly service with 4.5-hour travel times between Chicago and Detroit. And for the last one, a big ticket item that has gotten a lot of national attention is Brightline, 3.5-hour travel time between Miami and Orlando with 70 mile an hour average speeds and up to 16 trains per day per direction, Orlando to Miami. And so I'm going to hand over to Michael to talk about why we are talking about these comparable rail corridors and what it means for our route here in Vermont.
Yeah, so so we looked at these sorts of these routes. Actually, I think I saw a news article talking about how Brightline's ridership was exceeding expectations, and I was like, well, I know some like rail corridors in Vermont are like pretty good. Let's actually throw some things into the ridership model and like see if which one's actually better. So just to do a little bit of a background, like conceptually explaining what this ridership model is. Typically, when planners are trying to approximate how people move between places, they use something called a gravity model that really just considers populations and travel times and relates them in this functional form. So basically the idea is if you have 2 city pairs and they're larger at the same holding the distance fixed, they're going to have more ridership. And if you have 2 cities that are the same size, but 2 city pairs that are the same size but they're closer together, the ones that are closer together are going to have higher ridership. So that's sort of the basic outline.
So the 2 cities here would be New York City to Montreal City. Obviously, the population in Vermont is minuscule.
Yeah. So we do a little bit more than that. So we take a look at each stop on the route. We take the population of the the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area. And then we're also calculating essentially the travel time between each of those stops based on milepost numbers. So we will have actual estimates like by station for most of the population centers.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're using a little bit of a more sophisticated model. This is borrowed from Alan Levy at NYU's Moran Institute. It's originally trained on a German intercity rail. We've made some adjustments. So this prefactor, I don't know if you can see my mouse, I guess not, but this 1.8 prefactor is essentially used to scale from like the German equivalent to match ridership on the current New York Empire service, just to get things into the US context. The populations are raised to an exponent less than 1, which sort of helps to model how it's harder to get to city centers in larger cities to access rail stations. And this final term, we're essentially there's some time penalty, right? And this taking the max of 2.5 hours versus the actual travel time is really trying to model the fact that for shorter trips, people prefer to drive. So, yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so actually getting into some of the ridership modeling here, on the left, so the rows are organized by essentially speed. So the top row here is going to be like a 41 mile per hour scenario, which corresponds to the average speed on the Ethan Allen today. And then on the left, we have the current route, which does not include Montreal. And then on the right, we show what happens to ridership when we do have Montreal included. And, just to, start off, I think it's important to recognize what happens to revenue and, things like seat occupancy ratios on these trains. Today, after you leave Albany, the train really is mostly empty. Maybe you'd be lucky to have 30% of the seats filled by the time you get to Albany. When the train gets extended to Montreal, we're seeing a lot more travel demand, and most of those riders are going all the way from New York to Montreal, which is a huge boost in revenue, and reduces the amount of running time that you have not carrying, revenue passengers. And then just,
Just be on the trainers because they're not stopping and shopping usually. They're going city to city.
Yeah, if you can get it to 80 miles an hour and start getting to where it's better than flying. Okay, continue.
Yeah, so a couple highlights from this. Adding this Montreal service really increases the seat occupancy in Vermont by 5 times, and that's a huge thing for revenue, but it also suggests the need to plan for increased capacity, especially if these things are paired with speed increases. The new Aero train sets really only have capacity of around 300 seats. And this is, looks like it will exceed that. Second thing, the speed really matters for what the ridership projections are. We're seeing like a 2x increase in ridership for reaching 60 miles per hour over average speeds over the current ones. And if we could get to 80 miles per hour, which is more of a stretch goal, I think we need to reach 80 miles per hour average. We'd probably have to have significant stretches of 125 top speeds, because that average includes stopping, dwell times and things like that. Yeah, a lot of the ticket revenue is going to be coming from those Montreal to New York riders. And if you actually go through and translate these ridership numbers into what are typical occupancy ratios for Amtrak state-supported routes, which are usually, they want to have around 50% of the seats filled and not too much more, so that there's capacity when, like on high ridership days, on weekends, on holidays, when more people are traveling. That sort of translates to around 5 round trips per day at the 60 mile per hour scenario and 9 for the 80 mile per hour scenario. Of course, we need lots of capital investments to get there. And, essentially what we're hoping to tell you guys is that it would be great to have consultants study some of these higher speed scenarios. So these are some ridership models for the Vermonter. I don't want to go too much into these because it can take a lot of time to but just like a brief overview is we're also seeing pretty significant increases in ridership as you increase speed. So, going from 380 Montreal riders in the low speed scenario up to, over 1,000 in the fully upgraded one.
Okay.
All right, and so this chart is really trying to get at modeling what happens to ridership as we smoothly increase average speeds, as we increase investment. So, as we go from lower speeds, the current speeds of the Ethan Allen and the Vermonter are marked in green and red. So, these are essentially like the ridership potentials that we'd expect today. Some of this isn't realized, it's modeled on the Empire service, which has higher frequencies, and there are some elasticities between increased service and the flexibility that it provides, and more riders choosing to ride. But we can also see, as you reach sort of 60 miles per hour average speeds, the rate of increase in ridership is really significant. And so being able to achieve 60 miles per hour, really is like doubling ridership across the route, while also having those benefits of reducing operating costs by reducing, the man hours needed to complete a trip. All right, and this is the same slide, but with some more comparison routes. So we introduced all of these previously. High frequency rail in purple is that Canadian proposal. Brightline is the route that's privately operated in Florida in yellow. The Wolverine is that Detroit-Chicago connection, and sort of a burgundy color on the bottom is East-West Rail in Massachusetts. And if we're interpreting this, it's really to say that like the Vermont route, because it's so long and the city population sizes are so large, it really benefits a lot more from these other routes by increased speeds. And like all of these other routes are being considered for 110 miles per hour top speeds, maybe 125 in Canada. Brightline is talking about extending their route from Orlando to Tampa at 125 miles per hour. So I think there's a pretty big opportunity, and Vermont's sort of sitting on on essentially like one of the highest legacy ridership routes in the country.
Okay. Yeah, no, now I see why you said it was a potential high performer. Yeah, so yeah, go ahead, continue.
We don't want to lose those passengers to upstate New York either via the Adirondack.
Right.
Yeah, so it's essentially like to get there, we would need to look at in these different speed improvements. There's a lot of things that we can do in the short term. V-Trans have been a little bit hesitant to reduce padding in the schedule. There's things like high platforms at stations will reduce dwell times, and I think there's a lot of potential on the Burlington to Rutland route to do reasonable curve straightenings where it's less mountainous and can be done cost effectively. And just from a capital usage perspective, like being able to run do a round trip per day with one train set instead of doing two is just going to make a more efficient use of those capital resources that Amtrak's investing in. Yeah, and then now just handing off to Colin to talk about our survey.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So VPOP created a rail survey that was sent out to Vermonters primarily through online means like forums and email newsletters and basically anyone we could get in contact with. We ended up with over 1,000 respondents from across Vermont. You can see on the chart breakdown here. Chittenden County is slightly overrepresented, not by too much though. If you combine Essex Junction and Burlington, you're at about 32%, or sorry, 42%. Although this gets a little complicated based on, you know, where you're trying to go, because the Ethan Allen and Vermonter don't really overlap routes. And we have more survey questions, and if you do want more of it, I'm happy to send more of the data, but we're just including some of the major points here. 40% of respondents currently ride once a year or less, and 23% almost have never ridden either of the trains. So it's not just people answering the survey who love trains and ride them all the time. There's also people who up to now have never done it. Next slide. Yeah, so one of the things we asked in the survey on the Ethan Allen was based on how fast the train is going, how much more likely are you to ride than you do now? And we had a couple options based on speed. We chose this one just because the less than 6 hour travel time from Burlington to New York, I think Michael and Jake can correct me. I think this is practically achievable just within improvements that Vermont can make, you know, regardless of what New York wants to do. So you can see when there's no change in service on the left, more people are still interested in riding it more. There's 35% are extremely likely or likely to ride it more than they do now. But when you get this under 6 hour time, just, you know, mentally when people think about that, there's double, you know, twice as many people express interest in being extremely likely or likely to ride the train more than they do now. I do want to qualify. I would not claim the survey is representative just because we have no control over, you know, the demographics of who responds, and because it's distributed online, that can skew survey results. But this is, I think, still, it's not nothing, right? There's still 1,000 respondents within Vermont. And then just to take a look at Montreal interest, this is another question we asked, you know, how much more likely are you to ride the train with a Montreal extension? The interesting point here is just that we asked for both the Ethan Allen and the Vermonter, and you can see that they're functionally equivalent. So it's not as if, you know, once again, remembering that Chittenden County is slightly overrepresented, but you still have both. You have 2 stops in Chittenden County, you know, 1 stop for each train in Chittenden County. So I think the idea that, like, waiting for the Montreal connection to get the Ethan Allen on that route, I think you don't necessarily need to wait that long to see demand, you know, manifest for that route, and especially for those speed improvements that we mentioned earlier, right? Like getting the Ethan Allen to move faster to New York City now, as quickly and efficiently as can be done, is just as important as the Montreal connection. Next slide. Oh, and so this is a word cloud that we generated using some of the comments on the survey. Pretty self-explanatory. As you can see, people are interested in more service, faster travel, more trains. And interestingly enough, the city that came up most often in the comments was Boston, which was not prompted in the survey at all, but it was mentioned the most regardless. So, which I found interesting, and that, of course, you know, plays into the targeted improvements on East-West Rail in Massachusetts and the Vermonter. The difficult thing with the Boston connection, as you might, you know, kind of intuitively understand, is that it has to be pretty fast to beat driving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult
challenge.
I just don't think that you're going to get the ridership until that happens.
Yeah.
Pretty just really driving and park. Some people I know, even though that connection now is really difficult, do it because they don't want to drive or park in the city, and they're going into the, you know, have people they can stay with or something.
Yeah, and obviously the slower it is, the more you're willing to deal with having your car in Boston.
Back to your survey,
Faster.
back to your survey, you're right, it's nothing, you got 1,000 responses, but I do think you have to be careful about people who want to romanticize about what they'd like to see trains versus whether they would ever actually ride them. And I think it does get back to getting there quicker before
Sure.
somebody such as myself would do different than driving.
Well, I think the 6 hours, and the advantage of trains is that, for example, New York City, you're right downtown. And and the same thing, you'd be right downtown Montreal. So that's certainly a convenience because a car in the city is expensive and not really needed. So, yeah, there are advantages, but time, it's gonna be a major factor as the survey shows.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that was your last slide, right?
Yeah, that's essentially it. Yeah, just wanted to highlight, we're hoping that some study of 110 or 125 alternatives will be studied as part of the quarter ID grants. Trying to get Quebecois excited, hopefully thinking about how to enable that connection between the Ethan Allen and Montreal.
How much, we can find this out too, but just asking out loud, how much improvement needs to happen from Burlington South within Vermont to increase the trains past 59 miles an hour? I think we've had that discussion.
Well, we have the continuous welded rail that was designed to increase the speed, and then the crossing upgrade. So I'm not sure, whether there are other areas that are slowing down. Going down through Palmer, Mass used to be a real delay because of the switching that's been dealt with, but still, because that added like a half hour to the trip.
It's not all Vermont, you could speed up.
So do you think we're maxed out as far as on the rail?
No, Dan has told us before,
Yeah,
we're not
yeah,
maxed
it's
out,
like
but I know we're,
standard.
like on that first map they showed, there's focusing on extending Ethan Allen to have that route that goes down to Bennington.
Yeah.
Matter of money, but
Yeah.
ridership's up, so this is a good conversation to have.
There are some improvements we could make on the Vermonter to make it faster, but it's like, you go 5 miles an hour faster on 10 miles of the road for $20 million.
I think we'll get there. I think the investments that we've made in there have been strategic and,
Yeah,
you go from, okay, the bridges have to be upgraded, so we do that. We do,
They
the
are.
crossings have to be upgraded, so we do that.
it's little by little.
Yeah.
So yeah, we appreciate your work and you sharing it with us and presenting it to us. That's helpful, keeps the conversation going. We know we like that you're doing the modeling. We hadn't seen that before.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're welcome.
have a good day.
Thank you.
So I think with that, we're done for the day on our whirlwind